You have the USMCA in place.
I know, but
You'll have to deal with it.
USMCA is no good if they cheat.
What does that mean?
Well, there's been things going on that we don't like, and things going on where they took advantage. And hopefully, we'll be fine with Canada. I love Canada. Frankly, Canada should be the 51st state. Okay, it really should, because Canada relies entirely on the United States. We don't rely on Canada.
Hello and welcome to The Absolute Truth with Emerald Robinson. I'm Brandon Weichert, filling in this week while Emerald is on a much-needed vacation. The question on everybody's mind right now should be, though, will this be Canada's last, or Alberta's last Canada Day? Because you see, July 1st, today, is to Canada what July 4th is to the United States. And it's looking a lot like Alberta, one of the most important provinces of Canada, might be leaving the Canadian Union, the Confederacy of Canada, because they are sick and bone tired of being taxed by the Ottawa central government. So now the question becomes, what will Alberta do? More importantly, what will Canada's government do? Because you see, on July 4th, America's Independence Day, the Albertans are set to hold a referendum on independence. And this all goes back to the comments President Trump made at the beginning of his second term in office, in which he alluded to the fact that really Canada should be the 51st state. Well, all of Canada might not become the 51st state, but it's starting to really look like Alberta, the most important aspect of Canada, might just want to join our union because they're sick and tired of being unfairly taxed by the Ottawa central government. And to help us navigate this more, we have an Albertan with us, our friend Leighton Gray, the host of Gray Matters podcast. He's going to walk us through what's going on with this referendum. Is this all just a Trumpian trade deal tactic? Because it's important to note, right before that interview with Maria Bartiromo, the Canadians caved. Mark Carney, the prime minister, caved on another key aspect. They were trying to tax America's tech companies for doing business in Canada. And as soon as Trump started talking about 51st state again, suddenly Mark Carney caved. So is this a real thing? Are the Albertans serious about leaving Canada and possibly joining the United States? Or is this all just one big Trump art of the deal? Leighton, it's great to have you here. Why don't we dive right in?
Well, it's a privilege to be on your program. You'll forgive me, Brandon, for saying you're not quite as vivivacious as the usual host, but I'm sure you're making up the deficit in brain power.
I'm doing what I can.
First of all, great piece. I really enjoyed the piece that you wrote about Alberta and about Canada. I'm very grateful. I'm very pleased that leading thinkers like yourself are turning their eyes northward. I know that Canada a lot of times is an afterthought to Americans. Robin Williams famously described Canada as a loft apartment over a great party. And sometimes it seems that way, but it's important to understand certain realities about Canada and its importance to the United States. I know you're aware of this, but when Trump says that America does not need Canada, that's not quite true. I'll give you an example. What Albertans are offended by most by what's happening in the central part of our province, our country, especially Ottawa, is stupidity. One example is what you just described, where Carney very incompetently does a 24-hour flip-flop on these on these tariffs. Another example, you might remember the Premier of Ontario, when the tariffs are first announced late last year, he said that he was going to shut the lights off in Florida and parts of the United States. Well, he's so silly, he's so ignorant of the situation that he didn't even realize that the energy that he was going to cut off was actually coming out of the United States, because the oil that flows from Alberta and Saskatchewan into the U.S., many millions of barrels every day, actually produces the energy that goes up to Ontario. He was actually threatening to shut his own lights off. That kind of stupidity is what's going on in Canada. And then I'll just give you another example. Imagine if Donald Trump announced that he was going to give the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Fauci. Well, this just happened. The two doctors who were principally responsible for authoring all of the COVID lockdowns and vaccine mandates in Canada were just announced were given our highest honor, the Order of Canada. And there are class action lawsuits going on in this country over this stuff. So those are examples of the kind of stupidity that Albertans are just sick and tired of. So it's not just economics. We're fed up with what's going on. This government, it's very clear Mark Carney is an EU stooge, and that he is here as an emissary of that group that Donald Trump, as we know, is very much against. And you know this, Brandon, geopolitically, it seems as though what we have right now is we have freedom-loving nations like the United States, like Hungary, like Poland, and others who are following essentially MAGA. Argentina is another one. But then we have this whole cabal of states that are really controlled by the EU, that leading back to China, who are following all this nonsense. I'll give you a few examples. Mark Carney wants to draw Canada closer to the EU, but let's look at what's happening over there. Romania's recent presidential election, because the wrong candidate won, they prohibited politicians from seeking high office for merely questioning European socialism. In France, Marine Le Pen is enormously popular, but is in jail on fabricated charges, similar to what the Democrats tried to do to Donald Trump last year. The German government locks up writers and politicians for expressing inconvenient truths, heavily censoring social media, and is determined to ban any speech which government deems false. And then if you look at the UK, they have this two-tiered system of social justice where white men now face harsher penalties than everyone else, and migrant rapists go free while young English mothers go to prison for posting terms like Islamophobic on Facebook. So what Mark Carney is trying to do to Canada, what Alberta is resisting, is drawing us into this EU world, which, as I mentioned to you off camera, is like asking Canadians, or telling Canadians rather, to climb onto the deck of the Titanic after it's hit the iceberg. And, if Canadians really crave freedom, this is what Alberta says. If we really crave freedom and independence, we should cling tightly to the United States of America, because integrating with old Europe is nothing less than committing national suicide. That's essentially the position of Alberta. I'm wearing the hat that says, the West wants out, and I'm wearing the shirt that says Canada. And that it may sound schizophrenic, but actually what Albertans, in a nutshell, are trying to do is preserve Canada, the Canada that we know and love, that we knew and loved. We're trying to preserve our part of it, which is actually a lot more like the United States right now than the rest of Canada. And that's why Alberta seeks independence. And I know that you understand that very clearly from reading your recent piece.
Well, yes, absolutely. And thank you for the kind words. And I think that also Donald Trump, we often say here at the show, Donald Trump is sort of the equivalent of a political flashlight. He's going to light up a very dark, unknown truth, and he's going to bring it into the forefront. And so everybody initially laughed at the president's, 51st state comment. And at first you go, okay, this is Trump being Trump. And I'm sure there is a degree of art of the deal, just trying to get better trade deals with Canada. But it's really brought a light for the whole world to see that Canada is not this united country. And that, as your hat says, the western part of Canada, the most conservative part, and ironically, or perhaps incidentally, the most productive part of Canada for a century have been chafing under the reign of the East, notably Ottawa. And so we have this referendum coming up. I believe it's on July 4th. Another bit of irony here. Alberta is, I believe, set to vote on this referendum for possible independence. On our Independence Day here in the United States, it sounds like taxes are a big problem that Alberta has with Ottawa, which, of course, great fit for the July 4th holiday here in the United States, because, of course, our big issue was taxes with Britain. How likely do you think this referendum is likely to pass? And what do you think comes next for Alberta and for Canada as a whole? Because it's not looking good, in my opinion, for Canada in the long run.
No, that's a great question. And I think people need to realize, especially Canadians need to realize that Canada, as it currently sits, has really no future. Whatever the future is, there is no future for Canada, especially under a liberal government. The cracks and the fissures at this point, I think, are far too deep. As for the referendum itself, what we're going to see, there is going to be a campaign. We have delivered the necessary, under Alberta law, we have delivered the necessary number of signatures to force the referendum. Our Premier Danielle Smith does not support separatism or independence, and in fact, she's commissioned a panel of "quote unquote" experts who are going to travel around the province trying to convince people to stay in Canada. I don't think that's going to work, and I think you make a great analogy back to the American situation of independence, because of course taxation was part of the problem, and of course we those of us who have studied the American Revolution, as I have, know all about the Boston Tea Party and so on. But we also understand that there were other deeper cultural reasons, deeper things that were important to the 13 colonies, which caused them to break away from Britain. And, the other thing to remember, as this sort of ties into Canada, is that the people who are controlling Canada are the descendants of traitors to the American Revolution. About 80,000 of them, they called themselves United Empire Loyalists, went up to Ontario. They numbered twice the population of Ontario at the time, and they've been governing Canada ever since. And Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau are direct descendants of that cabal. Alberta has a very different history. Alberta's history is much more tied to the Western United States, much more trade. At one point, Calgary had the highest per capita population of Americans of any city outside of the contiguous United States. And that's because of the connections with trade and industry, especially oil and gas. And so this has impacted us culturally. Alberta has been very much Americanized. And also it's important to remember, Alberta has historically been the Bible Belt of Canada. Not so long ago, we had successive leaders in our province, premiers, who are actually Christian radio personalities, and so that is deep within the roots of Alberta and makes us very different. We're not descended from the United Empire Loyalists. We're not from that group, and so they're very, very deep fissures that have been going on for a long, long time. But we've reached a point right now where, yes, the economics don't make any sense. And to answer your question, I think if the referendum is held, and there's going to be a lot of resistance to it, not only within Canada, but from NGOs interfering with it from outside, I think if the referendum is allowed to be had, I think it's going to come out to somewhere between 60 and 65% in favor of independence for Alberta.
In our last 30 seconds or so, what exactly is, and this is excellent, thank you so much for informing us, because our audience really has kind of been at the forefront of the story, as you know. What is something that you're worried Ottawa might try to do? Because obviously your system's different from ours. You can have a referendum in Alberta, but sort of like what we're seeing in the EU with these elections, it doesn't mean the deep state in Ottawa is going to respect or let them go forward as planned. So what's something that you worry about Ottawa doing to try to complicate this issue?
Well, for your audience, if you remember what the Biden administration was doing, where they were trying to make the federal government, they were encroaching on states' rights left and right, trying to become a national government. Canada, like the U.S., is a federal system, which has a division of powers between the federal government and provincial powers, which operate as states. And my deep concern, and this is already happening, is that the Liberals have been trying to concentrate power in the Prime Minister's office, just as what was being done by the Democrats with the President's office. And that what's going to happen is they're going to do things unconstitutionally to make the federal government override provincial powers and basically make the federal government a national government, which will be beholden to Brussels. That's my chief concern. And some of the legislation that they're passing gives me confidence that that's exactly what they're doing.
Well, Leighton, this has been very informative. We're going to keep an eye on this, obviously, through our holiday. Thank you so much for coming on. His show is Gray Matters. It's phenomenal. I've been on a few times. I'll be on later this month, I think. And
Yes.
thank you for your time. And we will keep Happy Canada Day, and we will keep an eye out on this. This is the
Yes.
only
And
issue that is the foreign policy issue of our time that no one is paying attention to in D.C.
Mhm.
So I'm happy to be the one to
Yeah.
bring it up. Up next,
Thanks
we
for
have. Thank you,
thanks for
sir.
having me on.
Up next, we have Kurt Mills of the American Conservative to walk us through what's going on in the Middle East. World War III, or is it just part of the art of the deal? Stay tuned.
Swollen limbs, joint pain, inflammation, skin aging, and cognitive decline. These are just a few of the awful side effects that you can experience due to poor blood circulation. And Pop and ibuprofen is not a solution to the pain. It's only temporary relief, and it's only masking the true problem, which is inflammation. Researchers are saying to add this Antarctic super nutrient to your diet. I'm talking about omega-3 fatty acids, but not just any form of omegas. These particular omega-3 fatty acids are sourced from wild-caught krill. Has been shown to support healthy blood pressure, circulation, brain health, as well as reduce inflammation, swelling, and joint pain. For a limited time, you can grab Native Path Antarctic Krill Oil for up to 66% off plus free shipping. Just go to getkrill.com/Lindell right now to get your special offer.
Hello and welcome back to The Absolute Truth with Emerald Robinson. I'm Brandon Weichert filling in for Emerald. Well, last night, another escalation occurred in the ongoing Middle East war between Israel and Iran. Apparently, someone, wink, tried to assassinate an Iranian leader in the dead of night. That's where this video is coming from. We don't quite know exactly the details, but what we do know is that the Iranians have been vowing to retaliate because of this attack. And so if we look at clip number 2, if you can play clip number 2, guys, we'll see the betting markets are now saying 100% likelihood that the ceasefire that President Trump and the Iranians and Israelis entered into last week will break down some point at this month. And it looks like it might already be going there. Meanwhile, clip number 3, please. We have the United States in the last 24 hours officially approving $500 million arms sale to Israel ahead of Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to the White House, which is scheduled, I believe, for next week. The question is, though, is this just blind aid? Are we not going to enforce our ceasefire that the president has made very clear he is in favor of and wants both sides to respect? Or is Trump using the art of the deal here? Is he saying, okay, Netanyahu, I'll give you the aid. I already hit the nuclear facilities in Iran. That was the end of my military involvement. But in exchange for the aid, you need to stay true to the ceasefire. To help us answer whether or not this is the art of the deal or a world gone mad, we are now joined by my friend, Kurt Mills, who's the executive director at the American Conservative. Kurt also was kind enough last year to write the foreword for my recent book, A Disaster of Our Own Making, How the West Lost Ukraine. And so thank you, my friend, for coming on. We're going to get right into it. So what's going on, Kurt? Is this World War III, or is this just Trumpian dynamics at play here, and we just got to live through this sort of period of instability?
I think we don't know enough about the apparent attack, and so I think it's prudent to withhold judgment for now. I think the reality is a couple of things are going on. Number one, the harsh truth that the Israeli government, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, just doesn't have that much incentive for an enduring peace. It's perhaps a little bit like Russia-Ukraine, where one party is just not terribly interested. Secondarily, the sort of mixed messaging that came out of Washington last month, was on the one hand a bone to the restraint and realism camp. On the other hand, it was a handout to people who could think that they could convince Trump into more of a regime change posture. And then finally, there is this matter of pride and kabuki about the Iranian nuclear program or what remains of it. The supreme leader himself said in Persian for a domestic audience that they really hadn't destroyed it. The foreign minister Arachi indicated in English for an international audience that it was severely damaged. The DIA report, the Defense Intelligence Arm preliminary report, said that it really hadn't done that much, which of course attracted the extreme vitriol and anger of both Trump, but also most notably, or perhaps most pronouncedly, the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who kind of threw a theatric fit about this. So all of those dynamics give it a very either a phony war or an uneasy peace feeling. But still, it's not nearly as hot as it was in the teens of last month. And as I've been telling folks, Armageddon averted for now.
Yeah, so that does seem to be quite a caveat there, because obviously we're still giving aid to the Israelis, which makes sense. I mean, that's what we do. And certainly the Israeli calculus between Netanyahu's government being under siege at home, as well as the fact that their calculus toward Iran is fundamentally different, I think, from ours. We're sort of in this thing together now. And the question is, though, can Trump keep the two fighting sides apart from each other long enough to get some kind of a deal? And what does a deal look like, by the way? Because you have these two warring parties so far apart, existentially, dislike each other. What do you think would be an amenable deal that would possibly resolve the impasse here for the long term?
I mean, it's tough. I mean, as you allude to, we either hang together or assuredly we'll all hang separately, or at least that's the line Jerusalem is trying to hawk here in Washington. I think as to a sustainable deal, I'm not really sure one exists in any kind of durable fashion as long as the Netanyahu government holds in Israel. This is a government led by Netanyahu that wants to drive to war and wants to use his leverage in American politics to see that through fruition. If he was replaced tomorrow, he would likely be replaced with Naftali Bennett, his immediate predecessor, who is a conservative hardliner in the Israeli fashion, but far less integrated into the American system and far more predictable. This is not somebody who breaks ceasefires because he has to testify that morning. Netanyahu is that kind of creature. But with the constraints of the Netanyahu reality, and he's apparently coming here to Washington again on July 7th. I mean, the guy visits Trump seemingly more than Melania. It's his third visit in 6 months. With that caveat, we can say that basically the core of the matter is whether or not the administration can find some sort of workaround on zero enrichment. The Iranians basically think they have a sacred right to some level of enrichment, and then they also think if they do zero enrichment, which is effectively, close to the so-called Libya model, which is like, the voluntary disarmament, which, didn't really work out for Mr. Muammar Gaddafi, that will be the end of the regime very soon. So I think it's very tight. I think the reality is the administration needs to agree to some low level of enrichment or get the Iranians to reconsider this civil nuclear compendium idea, this corridor with Saudi and UAE.
Yeah, I think that's probably also, they might even try to loop in Russia. That's been sort of talked about Go ahead.
No, I think Russia has been underrated. I mean, Russia could behave as a deus ex machina here. The question, though, is what are the Russians' incentive? I mean, the sort of hawk line on this is that the Russians are in an axis of autocracies with the Chinese and the Iranians. But the reality is, if the U.S. got dragged into a war with Iran, that would be the greatest thing ever for the Russians and the Chinese.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. No, I agree. My other question is, we're talking a lot about regime. Greg, can you bring up clip number 6, the Barack Ravid Axios? Yeah. So, Trump has been very clear. He doesn't mind blowing up stuff in Iran. He doesn't mind giving weapons for the Israelis to blow up things in Iran. But he's been very clear, no regime change, no U.S. boots on the ground. But our friends in Israel, at least the Netanyahu Likud party, has been very, very, very clear that they prefer regime change. Now, something that we spoke to Payman Askari yesterday about, he's an Iranian exile in Canada, was regime change has already happened in a way. Khamenei, the Ayatollah, handed full control of the regime over to the hardliners in the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, and it looks like the IRGC now has complete control. So in a way, Kurt, we've already done regime change, and it's made it worse in Iran now. Are you hearing the same thing? And do you think the Israelis are going to drop this canard of we're going to overthrow the regime? Because it doesn't sound like they will.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we really know. I mean, Khamenei has basically not appeared in public just once. He's probably in a bunker. All of these guys are afraid to sleep in their own apartments and houses. That's a known. I think, what we know about modern authoritarian systems within, the 21st century, non-Western systems, so-called, et cetera, is that oftentimes the most powerful apparatus is not, this sort of liberal democracy, built in opposition. Of course, like the one that's getting, sort of foisted upon the Iranians is the Shah's son, who says a lot of things that I think maybe his father would disapprove of. He himself is an autocrat. His family's autocratic. So it's a complex thing. I think the reality is, what Netanyahu wants is not necessarily what the Israeli state wants. I think Netanyahu wants the perpetuation of the crisis. And, if he were to get this sort of halcyon regime change, I honestly think that he would turn his sights on Turkey, a NATO member, next, or saber rattle more about Pakistan. You started to hear more about Pakistan, getting an ICBM in recent days after not hearing about the Pakistani nuclear program for seemingly decades. So I don't think it would ever stop with Netanyahu. With the Israelis, I think the hawks are in that country. Their vendetta, their agenda is very clear, which is to break Iran into a bunch of pieces, to just basically put it into all these different ethnic enclaves, and have a very weak Iranian state, a la Iraq. Iraq is not a great place today, although they're trying their best, but it's kind of just offline. It's not on the map, and they want the same for the Iranians.
And as speaking of the Shah, I know he's in the son, Reza Pahlavi. I know he's in D.C. I know you're in D.C. You might have a better read than some of us. What is his level of support among the Iranian people? I know it sounds great. We're just going to plug. This reminds me of the old government in a box mentality the U.S. military had for the Middle East in the 2000s. We're just going to go in and plant a government, and it's just going to spring up. And what is his level of support really? How much of this is the result of very good lobbying? And is he just another glorified Ahmed Shalabi, who was the Iraqi that convinced the Bush administration that he could easily take over, and he could not? Is this similar, or am I way off on this?
There's certainly similarities. I think it's mostly the result of basically his name brand and effective lobbying. I mean, look, there are two main exile groups: the Shah's outfit, Reza Pahlavi, and the MEK. If I had to score it based, again, just from the outside, it looks like both have sort of fervent diaspora support, but the Shah's probably less controversial because he has less communistic ties and less arguable ties to Saddam Hussein. But with that exception, I mean, I think the idea that especially because the Iranians, as far as we can tell, have sort of rallied around the flag, rallied around this regime that is middlingly popular. I think the idea of sort of foisting what I think is basically seen as an Israeli-backed royal on the country, one who doesn't have his father's experience, doesn't have his father's life experience, and also talks very differently. I mean, go back to a video from the late 70s, late in the Shah's reign, of the Shah talking to Mike Wallace about Israeli influence. I mean, this stuff would basically appear in the pages of the American Conservative or Counterpunch today. This is the kind of stuff that Reza Pahlavi doesn't sound like now. He will be seen as a Western puppet in all but name, and I think that's not very durable for a sustainable government in that country that in a place we don't understand very well, and is increasingly further away. There's just not that many lines of dialogue in this country, and it's the same thing with Saddam. We didn't know what we were doing. I think we almost know what we're doing less here.
Yeah, I think you're right. And this is what I think scares me. And I know it scares a lot of our fellow MAGA people, which is why I say the American Conservative is on the front lines of this fight. Please keep up this good fight. And thank you so much, Kurt, for joining us. It was great. We hope to have you back with Emerald when she's back in the chair. And guys, give him a follow. What's your Twitter handle, Kurt?
Yeah, at CURTMILS, at Kurt Mills on X. And the website is theamericanconservative.com.
All right. Thank you so much. Up next, we've got Gregory Copley talking about the possible downfall of Xi Jinping in China. Stay tuned. We're at the leading edge of the news cycle today.
Huge breaking news. Mike Lindell Media Corporation, which includes Lindell TV, has gone public with the stock trading symbol MLMC.
Kara Cashinova from Lindell TV.
This is Allison Steinberg here with Lindell TV. We are currently on LindellTV.com.
The platform, which has rapidly grown to attract 7.2 million monthly viewers and 150 million annual impressions. Vocalist's subsidiary social media network supports over 70,000 accounts, and MLMC is poised for even greater success.
This is going to be big, everybody, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Hello and welcome back to The Absolute Truth with Emerald Robinson. I'm Brandon Weichert. The man you're seeing on your screen is known as Wang Yang. He's a former Communist Party official, and he just might be the man who will replace President Xi Jinping, the supposed president for life in China, coming this fall. Frankly, it's a lot easier to say Wang Yang than it is Xi Jinping. So on that level, we hope it's true, the news that Xi Jinping might be out. And in fact, what we know so far is that Xi Jinping has not been seen in public very often. His wife has not been seen in public. He hasn't been traveling with a very large entourage. The New York Post reported recently that Xi Jinping's bodyguard detail has been cut in half. No president for life cuts their bodyguard units in half on their own. There is clearly some kind of power struggle occurring within the Chinese Communist Party. This could have profound implications for the United States, the world, and our economy. And to help us walk through what exactly is going on behind the scenes in this opaque communist system, we have our friend, my friend, longtime friend, Gregory Copley, the great geopolitical analyst, and if you could roll clip number 4, the author of a brand new book, The Noble State, Governance Options in an Ignoble Era. Highly recommend everybody read all of Greg's books. He's also another guest that helped me out on one of my books, The Shadow War, Iran's Quest for Supremacy. Gregory, Greg, it's always great to have you here. Just let's dive in. What's going on in China, really?
Well, Brandon, of course, you're talking about opacity, as we're seeing now with the Iran situation as well. It's deliberately opaque. There's the craving on the part of the Communist Party of China's senior leadership not to be seen as going through a revolutionary change. So basically, all of the props have been removed now around Xi Jinping. He basically has no more power. He is there for, if you like, public appearances only, and then under very careful stricture. So we're looking at the move, which has already really occurred, back towards collective leadership within the CCP. This has to be further formalized, and it will be at meetings being held in August. And then if it's not announced, then it would be coming up through the elders meeting at the Beidehe gathering, the resort gathering of Communist Party elders and mentors, which will take place in November. So essentially, at either August or November, we'll start to see the new face emerge. And Wang Yang very possibly is going to be General Secretary of the Communist Party, but it will be a collective leadership once again, as we saw during earlier times, apart from the Maoist era itself. So essentially, Mao will either be retired or he will be deposed forcibly. It's now pretty much assured from many sources that Xi himself has agreed to this transition, and he's set out terms for that, including the protection of his family and himself, obviously, and the protection of the monuments erected already to his father, to Xi's father, who was a significant figure in the Communist Party. Not as significant, perhaps, as Xi Jinping would like to make out, but nonetheless, that's what Xi's demanded: the protection of his father's legacy, protection of Xi's life himself, and the terms of that are going to be very carefully worked out, and nobody trusts anybody. Xi doesn't trust his rivals in the CCP, especially as he has done so much damage to them over the past a dozen or so years, and they are doing immense damage to him even now. They've removed literally all of his acolytes and supporters and his key appointees. So the situation, though, is that the Communist Party wants to guarantee that there is not only continuity of power, in other words, that the party remains supreme, but also that the party is signaling a return to moderation and economic realism to a greater degree than it was under Xi Jinping. And that means trying to attract back foreign direct investment once again. So all of this so far is working well, and it looks as though President Trump is going along with it rather than holding the Communist Party's feet to the fire. We're at a stage now where we could see not only Xi Jinping be removed, or in fact has been removed, but we could also see the Communist Party itself collapse. And right now, I think President Trump has pulled back from that, just as he's pulled back from what's really necessary in Iran, regime change. So we're now going to be left with, if you like, perhaps a weakened Communist Party and a weakened strategic entity in China, just as we're going to be left with a weakened strategic entity with the clerics in Iran.
But is that always necessarily a bad thing? I mean, if we can bring China down to size, and maybe let the internal situation sort itself out, we might be able to buy ourselves time, don't you think, for a Chinese attack somewhere in Taiwan or against the Philippines. It might actually buy us time and maybe even let us get our own economic house in order by continuing to diversify our supply chains and manufacturing base out of China. Is that possible here?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what politicians want. They don't want to be seen to be bringing about chaos, so they definitely want to see this gradual transition. The question is, what does that do to the realism of the lives of the Chinese people? Does it solve the problem in the long term, or does it just kick the problem down the road in both Iran and the Chinese situation? So, frankly, I think we see that President Trump's fierce rhetoric about really changing the dynamic in the favor of the United States is not being pursued as dramatically as it could or should be. In the case of Iran, for example, if you have regime change in Iran, which the Iranian people want, but they don't want it to be given that by the United States or Israel. But if you have it, and you have an acquiescent Iran, you have overland access to Central Asia and the 7 or so major states within the Central Asian sphere. And that means that the United States could trade with those people, could influence those Central Asian states to the point where they are right in between Russia and the People's Republic of China. This would be the absolute pinnacle, if you like, of U.S. strategic prestige, to be able to dominate the Eurasian continent. And right now, President Trump seems to be backing off from that when he could, in fact, be taking full advantage of that. So
well,
I think...
Yeah, as Kurt Mills said in the previous segment, we're going to have to see. Everything's sort of in the air. But let's put a pin on that for a second, and let's talk back to China, because I think this could actually be one of the most important stories that very few, but people like you and I are really, and our friend Gordon Chang are really talking about. Greg, can we quickly play clip number 6, please? This is Ed Dowd from yesterday telling us about what's going on economically with China.
If the speculation and rumors are true, it's due to their economic collapse. Their bond yields are showing a deflationary environment. The tariffs don't help. So China has got an economic problem. Their demographics peaked in 2020, and they've been having an ongoing real estate crisis, which is getting worse. So we see these rumors as indication that their economy is in peril, and it continues to be in peril. And when power blocks such as the Communist Party come under threat from their populace because they can't feed themselves, eventually they need to create a distraction. That distraction is war. That's why the Taiwan situation is a big deal.
So, Greg, that was Ed Dowd. He's a financial analyst, very smart guy. So do you think that the reason this power shift is happening is because, contrary to what they're saying publicly, China's really having a very serious economic slowdown, and they're blaming Xi, and he can't fix it, and therefore his fate is sealed? Or is this just more murky data points, and we can't really be sure if any of this is accurate?
Well, it's true that Xi Jinping has never made one decision in his career as leader of the PRC, which has been favorable either to himself or to the People's Republic of China. He has been a complete disaster. He doesn't care about economic theory. He cares about sovereignty and the dominance of the party. But the problem started before Xi. I said in 2007 that given the water and food production capability of the PRC, that they would, unless they could correct those issues, collapse by 2025. And that's what we have. Now, Xi came in, and instead of trying to correct the situation, he took the massive revenues, the massive currency base, which had been built up under previous rulers because of Deng Xiaoping's liberalization of, if you like, of the economy. And he wasted that money on literally a political gesture. He tried to get world domination without getting his home in order in the first place. He knew that Mao's Little Red Book was outdated, so he created Mao's Little Red Checkbook, and he basically spent the money that was built up in the Chinese coffers on the Belt and Road Initiative, essentially trying to build a global infrastructure before he had a safe haven at home in mainland China. That didn't work out. The situation has gone from bad to worse. The agricultural situation has declined precipitously, largely because the underlying soil in the Chinese agricultural sectors is now ruined because of chemical pollution and the like. So you've got polluted land, polluted food. You've got polluted water within all of this. You've got an inability to control the waters, which essentially would stabilize the country. So the country's death spiral has been underway for about 20 years simply because they refused to address the problems at home, except in the one area, which was the funding for internal security policing. The internal security expenditure is now has been for some years, well in excess of the spending on the People's Liberation Army. So whilst we think that they are preoccupied with showing strength around the world, and they certainly are, the reality is that they are far more concerned about suppressing dissidents at home. And what you've got today are riots and protests in the streets of almost every city every day. And this seems to be uncontrollable. And despite their massive monitoring capability against Chinese citizens, the Chinese are showing immense courage in going out into the streets anyway. And the question is, has that weakened the internal security apparatus? Will they support the people or the party? And that's going to be a division. And the same applies to the People's Liberation Army. Is the PLA itself riven with so many divisions that it cannot fight a major war abroad? The talk, I mean, the PLA is well aware that the talk of invading Taiwan is suicide, and it's getting worse for the PLA every day. Not just because the PLA's capability is declining, no, it's improving, but the ROC, the Republic of China's capability, is improving dramatically. And the minute, anyway, that there's a war by the PLA against Taiwan, the Indians will move some of their million troops onto the Tibetan plateau. They'll move across Azad Kashmir, which is controlled by Pakistan, and flank China to the southeast and around Xinjiang and so on. And the PLA would be forced to fight major wars on at least two fronts, not even counting possible conflict in the South China Sea or with Vietnam and the like. So the PLA is aware that the invasion of Taiwan is basically that would precipitate a total collapse of the Communist Party of China and of unified rule across China.
So let's say that this power shift does occur. And I'm inclined to think it might be. It seems to be more than just Wang Yang. I know there's a triumvirate of two other very important players. A lot of talk about the Shanghai faction, which is sort of the Deng Xiaoping wing of the party, which tends to want to be more free trade, and they want to do more business and less militarism. They're still bad guys, but not the worst guys necessarily. What if this does occur in the People's Congress coming up in the fall, this shift, does that reduce the likelihood of military action by China against, say, Taiwan or one of their neighbors? Or does that increase? Because Ed Dowd and I kind of went back and forth a little bit on this yesterday. I said I think that would greatly reduce the chances that they would risk military adventurism. And he seemed to think that, oh no, that would escalate their likelihood because they're going to try to keep the people distracted. What say you, sir?
Well, you can't keep the people distracted from their ultimate disaster, which is starvation and homelessness. And that's what's becoming rampant across mainland China at the moment. So I think that a foreign adventure would do very little for them other than hasten the demise of the Communist Party entirely. So I do believe that this move towards moderation is being seen by the party elders as being something which would save them, because it would enable them to go and, as Khrushchev did against Stalin, he blamed everything on Stalin, and so therefore the party was going to now resolve the problems for the Soviet people. And the new leadership will basically blame everything on Xi Jinping and attempt to say, well, we are going to restore prosperity and the like. And we have to bear in mind that this doesn't, as you say, make them good guys. We have to bear in mind that Deng Xiaoping, who did certainly liberalize the economy and basically said, well, if it's not, the party doesn't have to get involved. If people are going to create money, that's good. But he was also the guy who pulled the trigger on the Tiananmen Square massacre. So that he is not, Deng Xiaoping wasn't necessarily a sweet, kindly old uncle. And neither are the guys who are taking over now. They are fighting for their lives and will continue to do so. And they think right now the best way is to suppress hostility with the outside world. And they're hoping that the Taiwanese will not flash this in their face and force them to do something precipitate. And I don't believe that the Taiwanese, the Republic of China government will exacerbate the situation, because they are well aware that they don't need to antagonize Beijing at this stage.
Well, I also don't think that they're very capable in Taiwan. I don't think they've been resourcing properly for a potential fight. I don't think they have built out the right force disposition. I've been very, very, for a decade, worried that Taiwan is simply not preparing themselves properly, which is something that Eric Prince has been saying for the last few years. So this is a story we're going to have to monitor very closely, Greg. You are on the forefront of it, and you should get due credit, and I'm happy to try to give you credit here because I know that you and Gordon have both been saying this story is one to watch out for. So thank you so much, Greg, for coming on. Check out his book, The Noble State. Greg is one of the best, and I'm very happy that we could have you on again. Next time we'll get you on with Emerald, who I know is a little bit easier to look at than me. So we will circle back with you again. And don't miss the next bit of the show. I'll be talking about Israeli air defense systems and basically, can Israel even continue the fight if it happens to erupt again? And sadly, I don't think at this point it would be a smart idea to continue the fight. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this. This is Lindell TV.
Friends, we all know the truth. Big Pharma and the federal bureaucracy have made a mess of healthcare in this country, and boy, that's an understatement. President Trump signed an executive order to bring prices down, and that's a great step. But we know that real change takes time. There's one pharmacy that is already stepping up. I want to tell you about All Family Pharmacy. They're not waiting. They're taking action now with a summer sale that gives you the power to take control of your health. Right now, through the end of June, you get 20% off site-wide, no insurance required. Did you hear that? 20% off, site-wide, no insurance required. They work with licensed doctors in all 50 states, and they ship fast, straight to your door. Whether it's ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, methylene blue, antibiotics, emergency kits, or your daily prescriptions, this is a time to stock up. If you believe in medical freedom, if you're tired of waiting for someone else to fix things, do what I do. Take action. Go to allfamilypharmacy.com/Lindell and use promo code Lindell20, Lindell 20 for 20% off your entire order. That's allfamilypharmacy.com/Lindell. Promo code Lindell20. Let's protect our families, defend our freedom, and make America healthy again together.
The last time President Trump was in office, gold soared 50% and silver went up a huge 53%. Americans who invested in silver and gold during Donald Trump's first presidency are very happy that they did it. And right now, gold continues to soar to the highest numbers in history. These gains are just an appetizer for what's to come. Some market analysis are saying that gold is predicted to rise another 30% in the next year alone. So now's the time to invest in gold and silver, and that's why I partnered with Fisher Liberty Gold. Fisher Liberty Gold is a conservative-owned and operated precious metals investment company. They even helped my good friend President Trump get elected through their contributions to Turning Point USA and other conservative groups. I have dedicated my life to ensuring that people get the best sleep ever, and in addition to owning a MyPillow, I can now sleep well at night knowing that you can all protect your savings with precious metals with Fisher Liberty Gold. With Fisher Liberty Gold, you can sleep well knowing that your retirement is secure. And if you call now, you're going to receive your very own presidential gold guide and qualify for up to $20,000 in free silver. But wait, there's more. Call now or text metals to 26786 to receive your presidential gold guide from Fisher Liberty. And for a limited time, I will send you a free MyPillow for qualified accounts. This presidential gold guide from Fisher Liberty will tell you exactly why you need to own gold even while Donald Trump is president. And just by calling in, you get a free MyPillow for a limited time for qualified accounts, and up to $20,000 in free silver. So don't wait. Call 1-888-4GOLD-19 or text metals to 26786 today. That's 1-888-4GOLD19 or text metals to 26786 today to receive your free MyPillow and up to $20,000 in free silver.
Well, picking up from our last segment with my friend Kurt Mills, the executive editor at the American Conservative, I think it's very important that we talk more clearly about what Israel is up against right now in the greater Middle East. As you know, the 12-day war between Israel and Iran was generally seen, and rightly so, as a success for the Israeli-American alliance in terms of setting back the Iranian regime, in terms of weakening and possibly permanently dismantling, though that has yet to be confirmed, the Iranian nuclear weapons threat both to the Israelis and the United States. But the problem right now is one of resources. You see, Israel depends upon what's known as the Iron Dome defense network. It's multiple air defense systems, many of which were either given by the United States or jointly developed with the United States. The problem is, because of the Iranian missile attacks, the missile swarms they were sending Israel's way during the 12-day war, the problem is that there's not enough ammunition. The Israelis were running low. This is why there was such drastic damage done to major Aviv and Haifa. And this is why I think President Trump was brilliant in pushing for a ceasefire when he did. Because if the war had continued on, and the Washington Post even reported on this at the time, which is shocking that they would actually have an honest news story. But at the time, they were reporting that by week 3, if the war had continued beyond the 12 days, Israel would have likely completely depleted most of its defensive ammunition stocks, which meant that the Iranians, who have tens of thousands of missiles in underground cities, would have been able to do even greater damage to Israel and might have even forced a very negative outcome to the war. Thankfully, the President Trump avoided that. Unfortunately, however, as we talked about with Kurt Mills, the Israeli government, Netanyahu government, has continued to press what they perceive to be an advantage over Iran. Iran is very broken by the strikes. They are having command and control issues, though they are adapting. And certainly since the first 72 hours of the war, the Iranian regime has adapted. So it remains to be seen just how much of an advantage in the long term both Israel and the United States will continue to hold over Iran. One thing that's important to note as well is the U.S. airstrike. It was a wonderfully brilliant, audacious attack that President Trump oversaw against those 3 key Iranian nuclear weapons facilities. We struck 2 of those facilities, Fordow and Natanz, with a total of 14 GBU massive ordnance penetrator. These are 30,000-pound bombs. They're the largest non-nuclear bomb in the U.S. arsenal. Unfortunately, we only had 20 overall. I talked about this with Colonel Rob Maness of the Air Force. He's retired yesterday. He seemed to indicate that he wasn't worried about the fact that we only had 6 remaining in our arsenal. But as I have shown in my column at the National Interest, the United States took over a decade to build those 20 GBU 57s. Now there are only 6. And the problem is that production line has been shuttered. We can't build more of them because we shut down the production line because last February, the Pentagon wanted to, instead of build more 30,000-pound bombs, they wanted to build 22,000-pound bombs that could be fired from long range. You see, GBU 57 relies on gravity to fall over the target. The Pentagon is worried about modern air defense systems possibly knocking out even our B-2 Spirits, which is why they want this new bunker-busting bomb to be able to be fired from a safe distance and not threaten our pilots with shoot down. The problem is the production line isn't stood up. So we're looking at a real crisis that's really not being spoken about in Israel and the United States, which is a crisis of depletion. And the problem we're facing right now is that at least the Israeli leadership doesn't seem to want to acknowledge it. President Trump has implicitly acknowledged this, which is why he is steadfastly proposing the art of the deal as opposed to world gone mad. It is my hope, and the hope I think of most of MAGA, that Prime Minister Netanyahu can let peace reign, work more closely with President Trump, and find an off-ramp that leads to containment and deterrence of the Islamic regime rather than compellence and regime change, because that means a very bad day for the United States and Israel if we have to go in harder against Iran. And that is the absolute truth. I'm Brandon Weichert, filling in for Emerald Robinson. I'll be with you tomorrow. Have a great day.